Hey guys, I miss all of you tremendously, and I miss being in front of you and the class and being able to teach. So, going forward for our next unit on the Middle Ages, I'm going to do a six-part mini series where I have the textbook and I'm reading from it the sections to you. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I am definitely tired of hearing and seeing the same people or even just reading to myself. It gets really boring. So I figured that I would do this to give us something different. So that is what we're going to be doing. So you are welcome to follow along on the video using the textbook that I'm going to show on the screen, or you can listen along and pull up the textbook on a different screen for you to read and follow along as you wish. So I hope you guys enjoy. We'll see how this works. Guys, let's jump right into the Middle Ages. We're going to start off with lesson 1, which is Europe after the fall of Rome. And that starts on pages 664 in your social studies textbook, which I'm going to pull up on the screen. Okay. So Europe after the fall of Rome. If you were there, you are returning to your village in Northern Europe after a hard day working in the fields. But as you reach the top of a hill, you smell smoke. Alarmed, you break into a run. Finally, your village comes into sight, and your fears are realized. Your village is on fire! In the distance, you can see sails moving away on the river. What do you think happened to your village? Geography shapes life in Europe. Europe is a small continent, but it is very diverse. Many different landforms, water features, and climates can be found there. Although we call Europe a continent, it is actually part of Eurasia, the large landmass that includes both Europe and Asia. Geographers consider the Ural Mountains to be the boundary between the two continents. Landforms and waterways. Looking at a map of Europe, you can see that different parts of Europe have very different features. In other words, Europe's topography varies widely from place to place. For example, while mountain ranges cover much of southern Europe, plains make up most of northern Europe. These plains are part of the vast northern European plain. This is the location of most of Europe's rivers. Many of these rivers begin with melting snow in the southern mountains and flow out across the plain northward to the sea. Even farther north from the northern European plain, the land starts to rise again to form rugged hills and low mountains. You can see these hills and mountains in the northern part of the British Isles and in Scandinavia, Europe's largest peninsula. Scandinavia is only one of Europe's many peninsulas. These peninsulas give Europe a very long, jagged coastline. Climate and vegetation. Like its landforms, Europe's climates and vegetation vary widely from region to region. For example, southern Europe is largely warm and sunny. As a result, shrubs and trees that don't need a lot of water are common there. Most of northwestern Europe, in contrast, has a mild and cooler, wetter climate. One reason for this mild climate is the North Atlantic Drift. This is an ocean current that brings warm water to northwestern Europe. Cold winds from the north and northeast can bring freezing weather in winter. Southern Europe. As in other parts of the world, geography has affected history in Europe. It influenced where and how people lived. In southern Europe, most people lived on coastal plains or in river valleys where the land was flat enough to farm. People grew crops like grapes and olives that could survive the region's dry summers. In the mountains, where the land was steep or rocky, people raised sheep and goats. Because southern Europe had many peninsulas, people there lived relatively close to the sea. As a result, many became traders and seafarers. Northern Europe. Most people in northern Europe lived farther from the sea. They still had access to the sea, however, through northern Europe's rivers. Because rivers were an easy method of transportation, towns grew up along them. Rivers also provided protection. The city of Paris, France, for example, was built on an island in a river to make the city hard for raiders to reach. London, England, was built along the Thames River. This river became an important trade and transportation route. Its location helped London grow. In the fields around cities, farmers grew all sorts of crops. These fields were excellent farmlands, but the flat land also made an easy route for invaders to follow. No mountains blocked people's access to northern Europe, and as a result, the region was frequently invaded. These invasions changed Europe in many ways. So guys, as you can see, although we started the year out talking about rivers and the importance of water to the building of civilizations, that's also how we're going to end the year. That doesn't change throughout history, the importance of river and waters and why civilizations grow up along them. Just some food for thought. Christianity spreads to northern Europe. As the Roman Empire fell, various groups from the north and east moved into former Roman lands. As they moved in, these groups created their own states. The rulers of these states, usually powerful warlords, began to call themselves kings. These kings often fought among themselves. As a result, by the early 500s, Europe was divided into many small kingdoms. The creation of these kingdoms marked the beginning of the Middle Ages, a period that lasted from about 500 to about 1500 AD. We call this time the Middle Ages because it falls between ancient times and modern times. Another name for the Middle Ages is the medieval period, from the Latin words for Middle Age. At the beginning of the Middle Ages, many of the kingdoms of northern Europe were not Christian. Christianity was common only in places that had been part of the Roman Empire, such as Italy and Spain. As time passed, however, Christianity slowly spread farther north. This spread was largely through the efforts of two groups of Christians, missionaries and monks. So first, a little on missionaries. Perhaps the most powerful force that helped spread Christianity into northern Europe was the Pope. Over the years, many popes sent missionaries to teach people in northern kingdoms about Christianity. Missionaries are people who try to convert others to a particular religion. Some missionaries traveled great distances to spread Christianity to new lands. One of the first places to which popes sent missionaries was Britain. These missionaries traveled all over the island, and eventually, most people in Britain became Christian. From Britain, other missionaries carried Christianity into areas that are now France and Germany. Not all missionaries, though, were sent by the Pope. In fact, one of the first missionaries to travel to northern Europe was Patrick, who took it upon himself to teach people about Christianity. In the mid-400s, Patrick traveled from Britain to Ireland to convert the people there. Unlike most missionaries, Patrick traveled alone. Although he faced resistance to his teachings, he eventually converted many Irish people to Christianity. Hence the day of St. Patrick's Day. Next, let's talk about monks. While missionaries traveled to spread Christian teachings, men called monks were equally dedicated to their faith. Monks were religious men who lived apart from society in isolated communities. In these communities, monks spent their time in prayer, work, and meditation. Communities of monks, or monasteries, were built all over Europe in the Middle Ages. Life in a monastery was strictly organized. The monks had to follow rules that were intended to help them live as good Christians. These rules outlined the day-to-day affairs of the monastery, including how monks should dress and what they should eat. Most European monasteries followed a strict set of rules created in the early 500s by an Italian monk named Benedict. His code was called the Benedictine Rule, and those who followed it were called Benedictine monks. But not all monks in Europe were Benedictines. Different groups of monks created their own rules. For example, monks in Ireland were very different from monks in France or Germany. Even though they lived apart from society, monks had a big influence on Europe. Monks performed many services both inside and outside the monasteries. Monasteries sometimes provided basic services such as healthcare that were unavailable to many members of their communities. The poor and needy would arrive at a monastery and the monks would give them aid. In addition to giving aid to people in their communities, monks would do the following. They ran schools and copied books for those who couldn't read and write. They collected and saved ancient writings from Greece and Rome. And they served as scribes and advisors to local rulers. Monks also helped spread Christian teachings into new areas. Many monasteries were built in remote locations where Christians had never traveled before. People living near the monasteries learned about Christianity from the monks. The Franks. The Franks built an empire. As Christianity was spreading into northern Europe, political changes were also taking place. In the 480s, a Germanic tribe called the Franks conquered Gaul, the region we now call France. Under a ruler named Clovis, this Germanic tribe became Christian and created one of the strongest kingdoms in Europe. As strong as the Franks were under Clovis, though, they had yet to reach their greatest power. That power would not come until the late 700s, when a leader named Charlemagne appeared. Charlemagne was a brilliant warrior and a strong king, and he led the Franks in building an empire. To build this empire, Charlemagne spent much of his time at war. He led his armies into battle against many neighboring kingdoms and conquered them. By the time he was finished, Charlemagne's empire included all of what is now France. It also stretched into modern Germany, Austria, Italy, and northern Spain. Charlemagne, a Christian king, had conquered parts of the former Roman Empire. For that reason, on Christmas Day in 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans. This title symbolized a return to the greatness of the Roman Empire. Charlemagne didn't spend all of his energy on warfare, however. A great admirer of education, he built schools across Europe. He also brought scholars to teach in his capital at Aachen, now in western Germany. Among these scholars were some of the greatest religious scholars and teachers of the Middle Ages. Their teachings helped shape religious and social life in Europe for centuries. Invaders threatened Europe. Even while Charlemagne was building his empire, though, new threats appeared in Europe. Invaders began to attack settlements all over the continent. Muslim armies poured into southern France and northern Italy. Fierce warriors called the Magyars swept into Europe from the east, attacking towns and destroying fields. From Scandinavia came perhaps the most frightening invaders of all, the Vikings. The Vikings raided Britain, Ireland, and other parts of Western Europe. They looted towns and monasteries and took prisoners to sell into slavery. Their attacks were swift and savage, and Europeans lived in terror of Viking raids. Because Vikings could sail their ships up rivers, their raids weren't limited to coastal areas. The Vikings also reached inland cities and attacked cities in the Iberian and Italian peninsulas. So just in summary, you've just read about the role Europe's geography played in its history. After the fall of Rome, northern Europe gradually became Christian, but Europe could still be a dangerous place. Europe's flat land made it easy for other people to invade. In the next lesson, you will learn about the ways people tried to protect themselves from invaders.